So I'm really excited that we're going to be talking today in W200 about Shift and how Shift is really impacting education. My name is Dr. Ann Ottenbreit-Leftwich. I am an associate professor in the School of Education and Instructional Systems Technology Department, and I supervise and teach W200. And I also have a great guest with me that I'm excited about. Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Lauren Smith, and I'm a fourth grade teacher at Lakeview Elementary in Bloomington, Indiana.
And Lauren actually graduated.
Yes.
From IU as well. So let's talk a little bit about you and your parents. So obviously you're here at IU, you're really excited. Your parents probably went to college in the 80s or 90s, somewhere around there. Things have changed quite a bit since your parents went to college. And so we want to kind of talk about, just in one generation, how technology can make such a big change in the way that we approach things or the ways that we do things. So I'm going to represent your parents, and Lauren is going to represent you in the way that you might deal with the situation. So let's say that in the 80s or 90s, I wanted to find out if a friend wanted to meet up for dinner. So one of the ways that I might do that is through a whiteboard, right? So you have little whiteboards on top of your dorm rooms. I think most people still have those,
Yep.
right? And you write a little message like, hey, come meet me downstairs for lunch or whatever it is. A corded phone, and yes, there were actual cords on phones, and that's where hanging up the phone came from. And answering machines, you could possibly leave a message if they weren't there, and hopefully if they came home from class, they would do that. But you do things a little differently now.
Nowadays, you can just shoot your friends a quick text, they can respond, and you can do it while you're doing other things. It doesn't have to be instantaneous. You can let it sit for a little bit, but you can easily get a hold of them. And there's also things like Facebook. You can, if you want to get together with your friends, you can make a group and invite them to multiple people at a time to the same event, or you can shoot a Snapchat. There's lots of different ways and messaging systems to get a hold of people right away.
So it sounds much more instantaneous, and you probably get a hold of people in time to go out to lunch with them, which is beneficial. So now what about kind of the stalking of the ex or previous friends, kind of figuring out what they're up to? So back in the days, you would kind of like situate yourself in different areas as the person walked by, or you knew their schedule, kind of creepy, or maybe talking to a friend. That would be one way. But now there are
You don't
different
even
ways.
have to try to stalk them anymore. It just pops up on your news feed or in pictures on Snapchat. It's a lot easier.
A lot easier and a lot more depressing. So what about if I wanted to figure out in the 80s or 90s what time Pizza Express was open, because they actually started here, I think, in 1982, and what were their specials today? So again, with the cordless phone, or their fantastic cups. Again, those cups existed back then, but now it's a little bit easier.
You can just check out their website and it'll have their regular hours, or you can check out, follow them on Twitter and see if they have different hours for that day, weekend, and there's several different apps or combined food services that have that information.
Again, information at your fingertips. So, and here's another question. Where is Djibouti located? It's actually a country. So if somebody came up with this question and I had no clue what it was, one of the ways that I would have to do this in the 80s or 90s is walk myself over to Wells Library, depending on how cold it was, go and look in the Encyclopedia Britannica, which none of you probably even know what I'm talking about, or look on a globe that was somewhere randomly placed, hoping that it hadn't been, you know, the Cold War. It wasn't something before the Cold War. Now it's different.
Now, with your phone, tablet, laptop, you can look it up on Google. You can just ask Siri. It's a lot easier.
All right. So and then the last one, and we put this one in here fun. If I wanted to play a quick game of Pokemon in 1980s or 90s, it was usually played with cards. Sometimes certain eccentric characters would go ahead and get dressed up and act it out. But now...
And now there's an app for that. You don't even have to have other people. You can play it by yourself.
And it's actually considered pretty cool
Yeah.
at this point in time. So thinking back, Lauren, to your time and like maybe when your parents were going to college, can you think of anything else where technology has really changed the way that you just operate in your daily life?
I think the biggest thing looking back would be when my parents were in college, if they were out with their friends and they wanted to get home or they needed to get somewhere, they would have to either call a cab where they would have to know the bus schedule and get a ride that way. But now we have apps that we can get people to pick us up in just a second with Uber and Lyft. So that's made getting around campus a lot easier.
Or just looking at the bus schedule online. So all of those things are easier.
Right.
So now I want to ask you, can you think of anything else where technology has changed maybe your daily life or ways that it's changed things quite dramatically? Go ahead and talk about that and we'll be right back. So this isn't the first time that technology has really shifted our world or society. This has really been happening pretty much since we came into existence, to be quite honest. So when we're talking about like with cavemen, how they did fire and wheels, this shaped and changed the way in which they interacted with their society. When we're talking about nomadic people and how we started out as nomadic people, and then once we discovered farming and livestock, then we were able to set down roots and really be able to sustain ourselves through different types of seasons and not just have to follow things. But one of my favorite pieces of technology to talk about is the Gutenberg press. And you can see it from this picture here in the middle. And the Gutenberg press really allowed information to take shape. So before this time period when the Gutenberg press was invented, people really didn't have great access to books because books had to actually be handwritten or copied, which took a ton of time and which meant that it was really for richer people. So as the middle class kind of came up and started to develop, we started to see a lot more of this technology being able to feed those people. So they were able to consume books and consume new knowledge. So you can see the actual difference here in terms of how many books were printed from the 15th century all the way up to the 18th century. So that's really changed. Another way that technology has really changed has been all these different fields. My first example for you is journalism. So journalism used to start out with newspaper articles and magazines, and this was the way in which people consumed their news. And then it went to TVs where people started to watch the 6 o'clock news with Dan Rathers, I think, or whoever else it would be. And now news has really changed to these bits and piecemeals where people send little short videos or little short clips. And a lot of studies have recently come out that most people consume their news through either BuzzFeeds or Facebook or Huffington Post, so different ways that they're actually getting information. Technology has also changed even the way that policemen service our streets. So now they're able to actually look up people's license plates, figure out if someone has a warrant or not, being able to communicate with someone differently. So technology has changed how policemen even do their work. The medical staff, so this has changed dramatically. So being able to do an ultrasound to see what's actually happening in utero. You can see if a baby actually has problems or what's going on. Being able to see the inside of a human to see where the tumors are being developed or what's happening. All of these medical advancements have been incredible in the way, and those doctors had to have technology in order to do that. My last example for you is even through iTunes, even something simple like music. Technology has vastly changed the way that we consume music. Now, instead of going to a music store where you get the entire CD, you can just quickly download it, have it instantaneously. So all of those things have changed. But what we usually hear from teachers is, okay, well, this is fine, but my students need to know how to do things the old way. What happens if that computer breaks down, or what happens if they don't have access to that? They need to know how to do things the way before. This isn't a new concept in education. In 1703 at the Teachers' Conference, they were actually in an uproar because they were so concerned that teachers were starting to switch from bark, having students write on bark, to going to slate. They were really worried that if the students dropped the slate, then they wouldn't know how to write on bark, which right now it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but that was one of the things that they were concerned about. The next one here is paper in 1815 of the Principals Association. They said, what would happen if they run out of paper? They won't know how to write on a slate without getting chalk dust all over them. Again, something that obviously students were able to overcome that hardship and figure out a way to use that technology. This next one is fountain pens. So students used to have to actually create their own ink. They were really worried with these expensive fountain pens that they wouldn't be able to create their own ink, and then what would they do? Then finally, ballpoint pens. I love this one because it actually says that this was the ruin of education because the businesses and banks will never invest in these because they're so expensive and we shouldn't just be teaching our students to throw things away. Obviously, all of these technologies are still easily and readily incorporated into education, and they didn't, because the students started using these tools, that didn't mean that they couldn't do things the old ways. So because technology is constantly shifting our society, we now have an unprecedented access to information at our fingertips. From the examples that Lauren was sharing with you before, where you could just talk to Siri and ask the questions or look something up quickly on your phone to come up with an answer. The unprecedented access to communication, where you could actually be able to communicate with someone either synchronously or asynchronously. And then finally, one that we really haven't talked about a lot, but one that we're going to talk about a lot this semester, is this unprecedented ability to create. So our ability as individuals to use technology to share, interact with people, and create new ideas. So I want you to really think about, how are you going to use what you teach, or how could you use technology to prepare your students for their future in a new society? Things are going to change, and if things have changed this much in just one generation, think about how that's going to change for you. And if technology has shifted all these things, why aren't our classrooms changing more dramatically? And so I'm bringing Lauren back in so that she can kind of talk with us about what this looks differently. This is a picture of a 1970s classroom, Lauren. And things don't look all that different when I go into actual schools. So, and there have been little things like from Edutopia that talk about the different elements of like a 21st century classroom design, which they incorporate some different makerspace stuff and different throw pillows. But can you talk a little bit about your classroom and how you are trying to adjust what you do to prepare your students for this technology-rich society that you won't know even what the jobs are going to look like in 20 years?
Just like this picture that you're showing, I group my students into tables so they can collaborate easily. Sometimes I'll have them talk to the person across from them, next to them, as a table, come up with an answer. I have a lot of spaces where they can go and work in groups. I have a lot of different kinds of seating. I have bean bags. I have little lower benches, so if they want to work in a little bit different area with a lower table. I have the physio balls for them to sit on. Also, I have like stretch bands, so there's a lot more movement in the modern classroom. Collaboration. There's a lot of different tools available to the kids, so they can choose the tools that work best for them or that will help them in achieving their goals. Of course, my classroom is a one-to-one classroom. Not a lot of schools are blessed with that, but we are.
And tell them what one-to-one means.
One-to-one means that every child in my classroom has an iPad that they are able to use for the entire day.
And you just got that last year, right?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. So can you say, how has that changed maybe the way that you've done your classroom? Has that changed it at all?
Absolutely. I use the iPad, I'd say probably 50% of my day. There's times where they're reading from a book or from a piece of paper, and sometimes they read on an iPad, because that's where I do as an adult. Most of my reading now is on an iPad. Also, the kinds of tasks that they complete, they have a lot more choices in how and it's more of a project showing what they've learned rather than a test. So at the end of a learning unit, I have them show me using a variety of different, like maybe iMovie, or they even make their own Kahoot, which is a technology and quiz. It makes it fun, but they kind of become the teacher because they create things to show and explain what they've learned. And so there's more choice, there's more, they're able to share it. I had digital learning portfolios, so they have their own websites where they could share what they created. This year I'm going to have them do blogs. And there's also ways for them to give each other feedback and on their own time see what their classmates have worked on, and their parents or their grandparents on the other side of the country can see what they're doing.
Right.
So
I'm hearing a lot of what you're talking about is increasing student choice and providing them with things, with environments, so that they're making stuff to showcase what they know and share with each other. And the whole idea about broadening the classroom outside of just the four walls and expanding it that way. So that's a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about this semester in W200 too. So thanks for of putting that out there. So this is our big question for you: is what is your classroom going to look like? Is it going to look like our 1970s classroom here, or is it going to look more like what Lauren is describing in her classroom, where there's a lot more student choice? And how are you going to facilitate that? What is that going to look like? So this semester we're going to challenge you to really think about how are you going to prepare your students for this shift. The next generation that you're going to be teaching, and again, think about if you're elementary teachers, then think about you have to kind of think about 10 years into the future, right? And when they're going to graduate high school or college and what they're going to do next, how are you preparing them for that? And how will you think forward? So I'm excited to see what you're going to produce this semester, and thank you so much and have a great time.